Okay, so I got a request about photo compositing with Beyond Typicals. This is something we're hoping to build into the software down the road, but in the meantime, if you're looking for a way to export a rendered typical section with a transparent background and composite it with a ground level photo like Google Street View, you could use this video as a guide to help you do that and hopefully eliminate some of the trial and error that might come with that process. So you'll see here I'm looking at Google Street View, and essentially what I'm going to try to do is recreate these existing conditions in Beyond Typicals and then position the camera in Beyond Typicals to line up with this view so that I can paste in a transparent background version of the model and place it on top of this image. And once that's all lined up, then I can save that camera in Beyond Typicals and create some proposed conditions or alternatives and use that same saved camera to export images that would also be able to go on top of the Street View image. So I'll go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to do here is find an image of the street that's as clear and accurate as possible. Here I'm on Lyndale Avenue in Minneapolis. I would recommend, if you need to go back in time on Street View to find a better image, maybe something with fewer shadows or less traffic, to go back through time and try to find a better representative image here. I'm going to stick with this one. You'll see my camera's off center. We've got some parked cars down the road, but the lighting's not too bad. So this might be an okay one to show, and it will highlight where camera position matters in Beyond Typicals to try to match up these lines. One thing I will note, this does work better, as I mentioned, without shadows, but these large trees are going to be challenging too. If you can envision a rendering that basically goes from back of sidewalk to back of sidewalk, that's going to cut off the trunk of that tree, and this part of the tree would still persist above that transparent image put down. But maybe that's more of a post-production thing where a separate Photoshop artist or workflow could either eliminate that tree from the photo composite or incorporate it into the rendering. So that's just a couple of things to keep in mind when you're trying to find your representative image on Street View, that you'll want a view with decent lighting and maybe not as many vertical elements that might get chopped off from a composite. So choose your Street View images or your ground level photos accordingly. So I'll keep going with this position. The next thing you'll see me doing here is rebuilding the existing widths into Beyond Typicals. So you'll see me measuring on Google Maps the lane widths and widths of sidewalk and those grass buffers and putting those into the model here. Finally, after that's built, you'll see I'll do one last measurement from back of walk to make sure that the total width of the roadway matches the total width in my model. So I've got about 86 feet on both, and we can move forward with this as the general framework of the typical section. So now I want to start positioning my Beyond Typicals camera to line up with Google Street View. But before I do that, I want to note that once you find your Google Street View image, should you be using Street View, be sure you copy this link down or bookmark the page, because as soon as you start moving your camera view in Street View, that link is going to change. So if you want a static image that you can come back to at a later date, let's say you need to revise something or get that image back if you accidentally delete it, it's a good idea to just have that camera position in place. That will eliminate some redoing of this next step in Beyond Typicals down the road. So now that I've got the Street View image, I'm going to take a screenshot of it. I'm using GreenShot. It's a free software download, and I like its screen capture capabilities a little bit more than the standard Windows print screen. So I'm going to copy that image to my clipboard, and I'm going to paste it into Google Slides, which is just Google's version of Microsoft PowerPoint. But I like kind of a PowerPoint slide type software to use these images for, because of the ability to control layers. So I can put this screenshot image on the bottom layer and then add in these rendered images with transparent backgrounds on top of those in PowerPoint and control the visualization that way. It's also a really nice piece of software to add custom labels or other notes on top of these so that you don't need Photoshop or any other advanced artistic software to do simple editing like this. So now that I've got the static image, I'm going to move back to Beyond Typicals and clean up this model to make it more appropriate for the photo composite. So the first thing I'll do is lengthen out the section. Since Street View can capture a pretty long length of that road, we'll probably want to maximize this out to 500 feet. And as I zoom back here, you'll see I'm getting that camera back as close to the front as possible so that we can see a long length down the model to match that Street View image. You'll notice this is a little bit of a bug. If you've got grass in your sections and you lengthen the section out, that grass doesn't perfectly scale to the full length of the section. For now, I'll just turn these off and we'll worry about those later. I can maybe show you how to lengthen those out. But for now, I'll just move these grass sections up to sidewalk level. And with these labels, we could turn them off or move them forward. For now, I want to focus on the task at hand, which is moving the camera and Beyond Typicals into place so that it sits over the lane at the right height and shows the right angle and field of view to match that Google Street View image as close as possible so that when we export an image with a transparent background, it can align with that. And then all those other tweaks we can make later. So I'm going to pause here. Right now in Beyond Typicals, we don't have the ability to pull in that static image and place it in the background and help us move our camera into place. That is something we'd like to add to Beyond Typicals in the future. So for now, we have the choice. We could do a trial and error method where we set our alpha transparency and we render it and then we move it a little bit and then we render it again and then we change the angle and we render it again. We change the field of view and we render it again. We could do that trial and error method and continually paste those rendered images over the top of our Street View image, but that can take a little bit of time. So I've thought of this rather rudimentary method of marking up your screen. It might look a little silly to others walking by your office, but I've basically put Post-its on my screen in key locations that align with some of those critical elements of the Street View image so that when we change our view back to Beyond Typicals, we can move our camera to line up with those lines marked by Post-its on the actual screen. So what I'm going to do is basically put Post-its on the outer edges of the sidewalk, and then I'll put one down the center line as well. And then I will move my camera back and show you what that looks like and maybe put up in the corner the camera view as well as my screen capture here so you can see those both in action. Okay, so here's the camera view of me applying those Post-its to my monitor. It does look a little funny, but they do serve as nice reference points for this next task. You could consider other options if you have them. This was just the first thing that came to mind for me, and I had these Post-its handy. So I'll transition the view back to my screen capture, but I will keep this webcam in the top right corner so you can see those alignments as I work. So the first thing I want to point out here is as I work through this, I'm going to be using the orbit camera mode quite a bit, and you'll see me adjusting the model center line here in the settings. That's because the orbit camera mode will orbit around the center line. So when I push that left, it's now going to line up better with that Street View camera image. So you see I'm pushing that alignment to the left so that when I enter orbit camera mode, it's going to focus on that alignment. I find when I want some control over camera, the orbit camera mode is really useful when you set that orbit speed to 0. What that does is basically anytime you enter orbit mode from either free or pan, it's going to reset the camera into a nice position that centers on your model center line as well as flat along the front edge. So if you start getting rotated out of place or moving too far away from where you want, the orbit mode is a nice place to return to a nice standard image when that orbit speed is set to 0. That orbit camera mode also has inputs for distance and orbit angle, and that's going to help you position your camera as well. So you can incrementally adjust the angle and the distance, and that's going to help you line up your model with the Post-its or marks on your screen a little more gradually. So you have a little bit more control over that rather than just your right mouse button to rotate the view or the middle mouse button to pan. This allows you to incrementally put in values and test those out as you line these up with your photo composite background. So as I speed through here, you'll see that I play with the alignment of the model as well as the field of view and the orbit distance and the orbit angle. And I even go to free mode a couple of times just to try to line everything up. I was having a lot of issues getting the center line post-it to line up. I played with field of view quite a bit to do that. Eventually kind of settled on 90 being a decent field of view. But really it was nailing those outer edges that would have been good enough. And I realized that I exhausted a little bit too much time trying to get that center line lined up when in fact I might have marked it a little bit wrong on the screen, or it might have been painted incorrectly from the center, or maybe some of the dimensions weren't quite right. But really nailing down those outer edges of the sidewalk were pretty much good enough for making the photo composite, which you'll see later. Overall, I spent about 15 minutes trying to line this up to the post-its, where if I just would have ignored that middle post-it, I probably would have had it done in 2 or 3. After you get it lined up, be sure to go to your rendering menu and save your camera. That way you can always return to this camera position that you took the time to line up. Then turn on Screenshot with Alpha and go ahead and take a screenshot. And what this is going to do is create our renders that we can use to line up and confirm that our camera position is correct. So of those 3 rendered images, when Screenshot with Alpha is toggled on, pull in the one with the transparent background, and we can line it up with that background image from Street View to confirm that our camera position is correct. So I really recommend doing this with existing conditions to start, like I did here. That way you can make sure that everything is positioned correctly so that when you want to create proposed conditions or alternatives or any other type of visualization on this road, you know you've got the camera position and you can play around in Beyond Typicals and change things around and always have that saved camera position to go back to as you create another rendering to put on top. So I'll speed through that here. You'll see I've duplicated the existing condition model, and I will make some modifications to it to represent a proposed road diet with some new sidewalk level bike facilities, and show you that this could also be pasted onto that street view image to create a proposed photo composite, and we can rely on that saved camera to do that relatively quickly. So now that I've got that proposed model rendered with alpha transparency using that same saved camera, I can replace that existing condition layer in my Google slide with the render with a transparent background and move that into position to create a really nice visual of a typical section using Google Street View as the background. So as I mentioned, we don't yet have the ability to import static images as the background within Beyond Typicals, but that is something we'd like to incorporate in the future to make this process a little bit more efficient and be able to possibly even render these directly from Beyond Typicals as opposed to piecing those together in Google Slides or some other document. So give that a shot and let me know how it goes. Thanks for watching.